31 tackles for loss to Alabama for last year. Somehow not invited to New York. You'll have to explain that one to me like I'm five. What's going on, guys? Kyle Krabs, Joe Marino, Keith Sanchez, Damian Parson, Draft Network's scouting team here. We're going to talk a little bit about the TDN 100, which dropped to mark the beginning of the college football season and yet another path to the NFL draft. And one of the things that all of our members of our scouting team had in common with this iteration of TDN 100 was the number one spot. Will Anderson, pass rusher, defensive weapon, whatever you want to call him, University of Alabama, the consensus number one overall player. And he had a runaway. Nobody else was close. And the question that I want to bring to this group of guys who has spent the last 3 months studying all the tape, doing the cross checks, having the conversations, how close were you to considering any other name for that number one spot? And Keith, I'll start with you since Alabama is in your region.
I had a feeling that this was going to come my way first. So I was trying to prep myself on which way this question can go. So I was trying to come up with a pre-notion to where this was going to go. But to answer your question, I didn't have anybody and it wasn't close. Y'all know me. I like to stir the pot sometimes. Y'all know I'll create a little controversy, make it spicy a little bit. But I'm like, I'll be going out my way if I try to put anybody else at number one. I think Will Anderson is head and shoulders above the competition. Like my guy DP says, this guy is flat out the scariest guy in college football. I like to call him the Terminator. And we haven't even got to the college football season yet, but he already has a couple different nicknames just to describe his play. So for me, it wasn't close at all.
Damian, I'm going to come to you next, and I'm going to ask you the same question. How close was any player to getting consideration outside of Will Anderson? And then my follow-up question will be, you heard Keith do the initial presentation on Will Anderson, and we all sat in on that meeting, and Keith talked about how unique of a study he was for his role, his usage. How much did that excite you when you watched him as a player versus how much did that have you asking questions on what his ideal role would be for any of the 32 teams across the NFL?
Well, to answer the initial question, similar to Keith, it wasn't close at all. And I literally said on the podcast, this is the scariest guy. He wrecks game plans all on his own. And, just looking at the overall spectrum of things with Will Anderson and going back to that presentation from Keith, it makes me excited because he's not a finished product, guys. Like we see the path to success. We see what he does and how he impacts the game and the game plan of opposing offenses. But this isn't the, I would say, like the Aiden Hutchinson in terms of his hands and being super technical just yet. He's still a little bit raw and unrefined there, and still yet he's terrifying. And it's like the way that Bama uses him with the twists and stunts and just allowing him to use his explosiveness, convert speed to power, the things that he's able to do without being a quote unquote refined hand technician is flat out phenomenal. And it's it's terrifying at the same time, because then it poses the question, what happens when he does come put it all together? What happens when he hones in his skills and he becomes a more of a technically refined pass rusher to go with the physical and athletic traits? So that's why I'm so excited about him, Kyle.
Now, Dame, I'm glad you mentioned this, and Joe, I'll come to you. Same first question. How close was anybody, if there were anybody that was? And everybody on this call had the same player number two. So I think everybody it was just how tight the gap was. But Joe, Damian mentioned the usage at Alabama. And I want to come to you with that and ask you, because you and I have been in the trenches with draft dudes for a long time. We talked about a lot of Alabama pass rushers together, and I know what my opinion is on this. But Will Anderson is a different breed than every other Bama pass rusher that we've seen come through off the edge since you and I have been doing this. So how much of Will Anderson's play is supplemented versus his role, and just how unique is it versus what we've seen so many pass rushers take on at Alabama?
Well, I'll say this first of all. Will Anderson is by far the most consistently dominant football player that I watched this summer, and that's what puts him very firmly at number one on my board and leaps and bounds above anyone else that I would put in contention with him. There's some really good football players. You mentioned Jalen Carter, Bijan Robinson from Texas. There's some quarterbacks that it might be knocking on the door, but nobody compared to the impact that Will Anderson made on a weekly basis. Now, Kyle, I love what you brought up there about Alabama edge players that have come through there, how Will Anderson kind of fits into that. And I think what you've seen here is a good job by Alabama's coaching staff to create a role, to allow the scheme to afford Will Anderson the opportunities to most take advantage of his ability to be disruptive. And that's why you see the stunts. That's why you see him moving around. That's why you see him crashing down and just creating disruption. And so I think because of what Will Anderson offers as a player, they've evolved that role a little bit, and it's something that we've really never seen from players that have come through there in the past. And I think that speaks to Will Anderson and how he can impact the defensive scheme and how he can wreck game plans.
Well, and obviously we all think very highly of Will. We all have him ranked number one. He was a unanimous number one overall player. And me, just like all of you, like Jalen Carter was number two, but I didn't think too hard about it at all. No, it was Will Anderson all the way. But we've acknowledged that there's still some room for growth in the fundamental components of traditional pass rush wins, right? But I think about the way the game is played now, and there's so much value that's placed into how many bodies you can get out into coverage, right? And how do you win up front organically? And traditionally, that's been, well, you want speed off the edge and quick penetration, three technique. No, you see all these teams are playing games now. All these teams are playing games up front, the gap exchanges, the twists, the 2, the 3-man games. And Will Anderson having such a robust resume on that front already, 31 tackles for loss Alabama for last year. Somehow not invited to New York. You'll have to explain that one to me like I'm 5. But that is very translatable to today's game. And Dame, you mentioned the room for growth. But I think one thing that's so fitting about Will and the Terminator nickname that Keith mentioned was the one thing that he does have is he's always moving forward. Like when he's in space, he's playing off of contact. He's constantly taking those steps, those marginal steps in advancing to the football. And I think that's just a natural, like innate instinct of Will that is part of what makes him so great. Now I'll open this up to the floor for any of you guys to jump in with from here. What's something you want to see Will Anderson within the first month of the season this year to give you an idea that he's going to continue to hold this number one spot and potentially run away with it and potentially go wire to wire?
Yeah, I'll take that. I guess just the natural ability to just win around the edge consistently, right? We talked about Alabama's scheme and his usage, and it's fun because you're watching a 240, 250-pound defensive end that in most schemes, traditionally, they are reacting, right? Like they're reacting to the blocks in front of them, reacting to the offensive lineman. But Alabama, they put jetpacks on this guy and just tell him, go. And he goes full speed every single rep. He attacks offensive linemen, and I thought that was special. But when we're talking about translating a skill set and what you do in college to the NFL, I wonder if every scheme is going to do the same thing in the NFL. So that was one of the things that came into question. Like, okay, man, I would love to see him just have just a natural pass rush rep around the edge where he uses his hands or, he uses different counter moves to just beat the offensive tackle. And, just in the role that we're used to seeing these guys win it. Not saying that I have any issue with Will Anderson and the way he wins because it's flat out dominant and it's fun to watch. But I think that would be something else that I'm looking for just so he can notch that part off on his resume.
Yeah, I agree. That's kind of the lane that I was going to take it as well. And it's not so much that he can't do that. I don't believe he can do it. I just want to see him win those just one-on-ones. I'm not saying he doesn't win by himself, but like I talked about earlier, it's a lot of twists, stunts, and games. Like Keith said, to Keith's point, I just want them to send him on the edge and say, go get the quarterback and see him stress the edges of offensive tackles, use his hands more and win in the diverse ways that, like we always talk about, translatable reps, right? Like we don't expect teams to consistently run twists and stunts with him to get him, that fast track running full speed downhill into the chest of a guard to just bowl them over and manhandle them in the way that he was able to do last season. Just want to see him, let him rush off the edge more consistently. See the development of his hands as he's taking that next step going into the draft to head into the NFL.
I think Damian said it for me. It's the hands. Just show more with the hands. Show more counters, the ability to string together moves and work off of all the different ways that you can stress the pocket, right? In a variety of ways. It's not just the width. So you could send this guy through interior gaps as well, and he's going to create a lot of problems. But more variety with the hands is something that I'm looking forward to. And stay healthy, man. Just stay healthy out there, Will. Do what you do. Stay healthy, and I think he's got a real chance of going wire to wire.
That was it for me. Don't get hurt, right? Go out, play lights out, play fast, continue doing what you did last year. I don't even think he needs to show any growth. I think about what Myles Garrett was as a pass rusher when he came out and went number 1 overall, and obviously he was a bigger player and a bigger prospect. You think about Jadeveon Clowney and what he was when he came out. Will Anderson is a special breed, and for me, even if he doesn't show the growth, as long as he's got the health, I feel really confident in his ability to go wire to wire and stay at the top of this TDN 100 list. But that's going to do it for this conversation on Alabama pass rusher Will Anderson, our consensus number 1 player in the first iteration of the TDN 100. Make sure to check out thedraftnetwork.com to get the full list for this year's initial TDN 100.